Hello everyone, my name is Georgy Kucherin, and I investigate complex threats at Kaspersky's global research and analysis team. And when you are dealing with complex spyware nowadays, it's very difficult to investigate it all alone, because modern attacks conducted by APTs, they consist of multiple steps. And getting every single piece of information about every step conducted during the attack is very difficult to do alone, and that's why we have the cybersecurity community that really helps us with that. So how this usually works is, if you have a cyber attack, a complex one, then multiple cybersecurity companies start investigating it at once, independently from each other. And as a result, we have multiple threat intelligence reports about the same attack. But all those reports are very different from each other, as because company A may write something about initial infection, company B may write about lateral of movement, company C may write about data exfiltration. And what we do in the cybersecurity community is we try to combine all those facts mentioned in these reports into a single picture, and thus get a complete outline of each attack. So this power of community is exactly what I want to talk about today, because the story I'll be telling you will be about how we were able, thanks to the efforts of 4 cybersecurity companies, to discover a sophisticated attack and learn everything about it, from initial infection to attribution. And before I start, I also have some prizes to give away, so please listen to my talk attentively, and let's have some malware analysis fun. So we first discovered this attack when we noticed a set of phishing emails in our antivirus telemetry getting sent to high-profile organizations in Russia. And as it is always happens for phishing emails, they turned out to contain a malicious attachment, namely an archive. Let's look inside it. We examined the archive and found out that it contains a folder named .con, and this folder contained 3 files. One of them was named 1.docx, and it was a legitimate document used for luring the victim. The other file, named doc, was a legitimate and signed executable, while the third one was a malicious DLL named docs. And also, apart from this folder, the archive also contained a lu shortcut, and when the victim clicked on it, it would trigger the infection chain. So when the victim clicked on a shortcut, here's what would happen. The shortcut would execute a series of shell commands, and as we can see from here, it would firstly open the lu document to the victim, and afterwards it would copy the executable as well as the DLL from the archive we saw previously into the downloads folder of the public user. Afterwards, it would launch this executable and finally finish. So what's happening here is that we are launching a legitimate executable named desktop.exe. However, this executable is vulnerable to the DLL side loading technique. And what happens is that when we place this version.dll file in the same folder as desktop.exe, then whenever we launch the executable, this version.dll library gets loaded into this process, and as a result, we have malicious code running in the context of a legitimate process. And also, when we try to search for traces of this infection campaign, we identified that Russia was not only the only country that was infected, because we were made aware by the company Proofpoint that they discovered a similar campaign targeting organizations in the United States. And as you can see from here, the structure of the archives used for infection, they are pretty similar. The only differences are in the names of folders and files. And if we look at the commands executed by the shortcut, we can also see they're pretty much the same. Now, speaking of the payload that gets dropped throughout those phishing emails, it turned out to be a DLL obfuscated with VM Protect, which is quite a complex obfuscator, and because of that, there is no publicly available deobfuscation tool for it. And due to that, some reverse engineers, some malware analysts, especially some novice ones, when they see VM Protect, they say like, it's VM Protect, it's very complex, I'm not going to analyze it. They just try to load it in a sandbox or even abandon analyzing it with losing all hope of getting the original unobfuscated code. However, in malware, in many cases, threat actors obfuscate their implants in a way that you can still retrieve the original unobfuscated code from process memory and then dump it. And let me show you how you can do it in case you don't know how to do it. So here I have a virtual machine. Let's wait until it loads. And over here I have the run DLL32.exe process. And what this process will do is that it will load our version.dll library and invoke its get file version info W export. So what we will do before we launch the DLL is that we'll go to Options and click Preferences, and here we put a tick on User DLL entry. This way, the debugger will place a breakpoint whenever we reach the entry point of our malicious DLL. Let's save the settings and continue executing the binary. So now we are at the run DLL32 entry point. And here is the entry point of our DLL. And if we look at the code here, we can see that we have some junk code that has been inserted by VM Protect to thwart analysis. And now, if we go to our exported function, we'll see that it contains 0 bytes. And what we'll do is we'll place a hardware breakpoint here. I right-click, select breakpoint, and set hardware on execution. And I continue executing the file. Now, as you can see, our program has stopped again. And what we have here, if we scroll down, we can see we obtained unobfuscated code, which we can further dump from the memory and analyze it in any static analysis tool like IDA or Ghidra. And to demonstrate to you that this is indeed unobfuscated code, let me show you the strings obtained in our payload. I right-click, search for current region string references. And let's look at the strings we have here in more detail. Like, if we scroll down, we can see some strings related to Dropbox, as well as to some authorization access tokens, and we also have something related to JSON. And just by looking at those strings, we can actually infer what this malware does. It takes the Dropbox tokens embedded in its body, and then it uses them to connect to a Dropbox cloud storage created by attackers. And actually, this storage turned out to contain a file named a.psd. This file contains the commands that the malware needs to execute. As we can see from here, the malware supports 5 commands that allow it to manage the file system as well as execute shell commands. Now, when those commands get executed, the execution results get uploaded back to the cloud to the file named b.psd. And after this happens, attackers read the file, and then they find out how each of the commands executed. And apart from identifying the commands themselves, we're actually been able to find out how attackers were using this tool for malicious purposes. We identified that firstly, they executed shell commands, the whoami and system info ones, to retrieve information about the infected machine. And after doing that, they proceeded deploying a second payload to the machines. To do that, they uploaded 3 files. One of them was named mshupdate.exe, and it was a legitimate Microsoft Edge update component signed by Microsoft. Now, the second file was named mshupdate.dll, which was a malicious DLL. And finally, the third file was named WD, and it was an encrypted payload. Now, some of you may have already guessed that we have a situation that we saw earlier. Again, the malware uses DLL side loading to achieve execution. When the Microsoft Edge update process starts, it ends up loading the malicious DLL, and this DLL turned out to decrypt the WD file with XOR using a 5-byte key. And the decrypted payload, it then got injected into the DLL host.exe process, and further operations continued from it. And as expected from any malware, it contacted the C2 server to receive commands from it. And as for the C2 server, it actually turned out to be GitHub. We can see right here that attackers created a malicious profile on GitHub. And if we look at the profile pic, we notice some tulips here. Does anybody actually know where this picture is from? Where the attackers took it from? I'll give a prize to whoever says the correct answer. Sorry? Sorry? No. Like, not the country, but where they found this picture. Yes? Very close, very close. No? Yeah, Windows 7. Yeah, Windows XP had a similar one, but this one is actually from Windows 7. And I'm going to give you the prize after the talk. So yeah, attackers, they felt nostalgic about Windows 7, the good old operating systems without bloatware, right? And so they put this profile picture there. But what's more important for us is not the profile picture, but this profile description here, which contains a base64 string. So what the malware does is it obtains the source code of this GitHub profile page, and then it extracts the description from it. And it decodes it with base64 and XORs it with the 1-byte key. And as a result, it ends up obtaining a second stage C2 server address, which is used for communicating with attackers. Speaking of commands implemented in this malware, the range of commands was actually larger than before, because this malware also supported taking screenshots, proxying traffic, and keylogging. We have some cyber espionage capabilities here. So after they deployed this malware and conducted some reconnaissance using it, they proceeded infecting the machines with a persistent implant. And this was done in several steps. Firstly, attackers deployed a small utility to the machines, and we can see its source code below. Let's look at what it does. Firstly, it generates a 4-byte key using the getTCount function. And then it encrypts this key using the cryptProtectData function. Afterwards, it prints the key as well as its ciphertext to attackers. What's interesting here is that the function used for encryption, called cryptProtectData, it encrypts data in a way that only the user who encrypts the data can decrypt it. So if you don't have access to the machine that was used to encrypt the data, you can't decrypt anything. And they use this function to make more problems for threat researchers, because if you capture some payloads encrypted with this key, you can't decrypt them unless you have access to the victim machine. And after they run this utility, they deployed again 3 files. Again, we see the DLL side loading technique here, legitimate exe file, a malicious DLL, and the payload encrypted with the key we saw before. And they also now configured this executable file to launch on startup through scheduled tasks. Now, as for the payload inside the encrypted file, it turned out to be a backdoor that we dubbed Cloud Sorcerer. This backdoor consisted of 2 components. The first one was designed to communicate with the network, and it ran from the msi exec.exe process. The second one was used to run commands. And no matter how funny it may sound, attackers configured it to run inside the paint process. And these two components were designed to communicate with each other through a named pipe. Now, the range of commands available in this backdoor was much larger than the one we saw before. And it could do stuff like process creation, managing scheduled tasks, registry, conducting network reconnaissance, as well as it could deploy additional payloads. And as for network communications, we see things similar to what we observed before. We have a GitHub profile which contains an encrypted payload. In its description, the malware extracts this payload, then it decrypts it using a simple substitution cipher with this table here, and it ends up decrypting cloud storage tokens. Unlike the previous backdoor we saw, which supported only Dropbox, Cloud Sorcerer could work with 3 cloud storages. OneDrive, Dropbox, and the second one is called Yandex Cloud. It's a cloud service popular in Russia. And then it communicated with this cloud storage to receive commands and send back the execution results. What's also interesting about this malware is that when we analyzed all the samples we found, we identified that they use different websites for storing those encrypted cloud storage tokens. And the choice of websites depended on the infection country. For example, in Russia, they use popular Russian websites. Like here in the top left corner, you can see this is a social network similar to Facebook, which is popular in Russia. This one here is also a Russian website used for posting blogs. And as for the US, attackers were observed to use the Microsoft Answers portal to store those encrypted tokens. And also we identified them use the Quora Q&A portal. Now, we actually found out that while this backdoor had a wide range of commands, they didn't really use them. They used Cloud Sorcerer only to deploy yet one more payload, which we dubbed plug-y. And unlike the previous backdoors, plug-y didn't use GitHub or cloud storages. It was just connecting to a C2 server either through TCP, UDP, or via named pipes. As for its capabilities, it could be used to construct proxy tunnels between the intranet of the infected organization and the internet, as well as it could deploy, it could be used for cyber espionage capabilities like key logging, taking screenshots, and so on. And this was actually the last payload in the chain. Apart from this plug-y backdoor, we didn't see anything else deployed. And so, as we can see, during this attack, the threat actor used 4 different implants. Let's count them once again. First, the implant that was deployed through emails, then the second stage implant used for reconnaissance, and the persistent Cloud Sorcerer implant, and then plug-y. These implants, they contained a lot of code, and so the question is, how do they manage this code? How do they support its development? Do they have an army of hackers who sit day and night developing their code? Or do they use AI to generate their malware? Or rather, is the malware we saw, was it used in any previous attacks? Well, to find that out, we are going to be looking for unique traits inside each of the malware we observed. And then we'll try to use threat intelligence to identify whether this malware was previously observed. So, for example, in the initial payload, we have some unique strings here, like this file name a.psd, as well as the commands dir, exec, sleep, upload, etc. So, if we do a Google search on these commands, we'll actually find out an article published by the company Positive Technologies. And if we look at the contents of the article, we can see that it references the same a.psd and b.psd files. And the malware described in this article, it has the same commands we saw here. As for the malware itself, it dates back to 2021. And just in our case, it was used as an initial stage implant in some phishing attacks. Here, I think if you've been doing malware analysis, you also saw this picture with the malicious documents. Like, click here to execute a macro, this kind of stuff. And again, it was used to perform reconnaissance as attackers used it to deploy a Stilla. However, there are also some changes, as the backdoor discovered by Positive Technologies used the Yandex disk cloud storage instead of Dropbox. And actually, Positive Technologies attributed this malware to APT31, which is a Chinese-speaking actor. Now, speaking of the second backdoor, we saw that it decrypts the payload using this 5-byte XOR key. And again, let's try to Google it. And if we do that, we'll find an article by the company cybersecurity. If we read it, we again see a description of a malware from 2022 that was named just as the malware we saw today, mshageupdate.dll. And the authors of the article noted that the malware contains some strings in Korean. However, these are either Easter eggs or false flags because cybersecurity ended up also attributing this malware to APT31. As for Cloud Sorcerer, it also turned out to be used in the past, and we have been able to identify its samples back from 2022. Finally, as for the last backdoor, plug Y, well, we actually couldn't find any strings that could be useful for Googling. So instead, we decided to make some code signatures, some unique code signatures, and then use them to run a retro hunt on VirusTotal. And as a result, we obtained some interesting samples that matched the Yara rules we composed. And one of the samples caught with those signatures, it was a backdoor named Clambling. This backdoor was reported by Trend Micro, and they noted that it used Dropbox for command and control communications. However, they attributed it not to APT31, but to APT27. So what we have here is we have two backdoors used in the same attack with the same signatures, but by two different actors, APT31 and APT27. Actually, here it's not a contradiction because both these actors are Chinese-speaking, and it's more likely that Chinese-speaking actors, they tend to share their intelligence and their tradecraft and tools with each other. So this explains why we have two different actors here, because they speak the same language and they share the same tools. Now, if we look at the code of these backdoors, we can see it's pretty similar. Like here is a code that retrieves the list of available drives and their free space. Here's the code that gets the name of the active window. And here is the code that manages screenshot taking. And as well, apart from Clambling, we noted another interesting hit produced by our Yara role, as it also managed to hunt a sample of PlugX. PlugX is a backdoor commonly used by Chinese-speaking threat actors. And what was interesting here is that there was a custom library used for network communications with the UDP protocol, and it was present only in PlugX, Clambling, and PlugY, and nowhere else. And this further strengthens the claim that a Chinese-speaking actor is behind this attack. So now that we have examined the history of every malware we saw, what can we say about it? Well, the code base of the malware is pretty old. Attackers reuse it for years because we saw the samples from 2021, from 2022, that's like 3 years old. However, they still tend to make some minor changes to it sometimes. Maybe when somebody releases a threat intelligence report on those samples. For example, they may switch to another cloud storage or use another website to host those cloud service tokens we saw. The changes are very minor, and the overall code base stays the same. What's also notable is that the TTPs attackers use, they're quite limited. Like the initial infection thing, it involves some malicious archives and shortcuts. It's a very popular trick nowadays, and practically every modern cybersecurity solution can catch it. Now, also, attackers seem to be focused a lot on DLL sideloading. We saw a lot of samples loaded through it. And finally, many samples upload their data to the cloud, so they also tend to use cloud storages, and they use the same set of TTPs for many years. And this is very lucky for us, because this lack in the creativity actually allows us to build a good defense strategy against further attacks of the sector. For instance, we can see that the malware they deploy is very versatile. However, it's best to detect this activity using phishing emails, because those emails, it's very easy, as I have said, to detect them. You install a security solution to the email server, and that's it. It will very likely detect it. However, it's still also beneficial to use Yara rules with some various code signatures to detect the payloads in memory. And another useful thing is to try and analyze the network for connections to cloud storages. What you can do is just record the traffic in your organizations and see how cloud storage is used in it. And if you see that normally nobody from the organization uses the storages, and then you suddenly see machines starting frequently connecting to cloud storage APIs every 30 minutes, then it's suddenly an anomaly. But one thing we can do in general is we can continue sharing the information about further attacks of the sector. If we share it publicly, the more we share, the more difficult it will be for attackers to adapt their infection strategy, because the more we share, it will be easier to spot their attacks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Georgy. Questions?
I also have a reward for the best question, so please don't be shy with your questions.
Can you blink when you spot the best question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. Questions?
Great presentation, thank you. I wanted to ask here, if any of the websites like Microsoft or GitHub change their design, their source code, wouldn't the APT be rendered useless, since it would not be able to extract the commands anymore?
Well, what they use, let me show you one of the previous slides. Can you bring up the slides, please? So what they did, if you look here on GitHub, the tokens, they had a prefix. Like you see here, you have the prefix CDOY here. So no matter how the page with the profile changes, you can just get a source code and then find this pattern inside and extract it.
Thank you.
Here in the front.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, great work about it. Have you tried to research a bit about after attributing to the APT what happens? For example, in some research that I found about some can you hear me?
Yeah.
In some research that I found, even myself doing it, some of the APT groups, especially in the Russian region, tend to share intelligence between each other and then try to work both to do attacks as a state actor, or try to make like an academy for new recruits, to even co-opt different people onto using their knowledge and then working for them.
Sorry, what's the question in short?
If you have tried to see after attributing to a certain actor, what happens next?
What happens next is then, it always happens that attackers go silent for maybe a few months or so, and then they change something in their implants and they continue attacking, because they have been reusing the same code base for years, and still, even though there were threat intelligence reports released about the activities. They didn't change the code base, so they will just continue doing what they did previously. They'll continue doing it in the future. That's always what happens with APTs.
Thank you.
Another question here. So I see lots of love for DLL side loading.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's because they want to evade detection.
Yeah.
So are there any good ways to detect this technique of DLL side loading?
Well, a good strategy is that not to trust code that is executed in legitimate processes, because someone can inject code into it, and as long as you don't trust any process on the system, even if it's signed, even if it's legitimate, then you'll end up detecting the attack. Or maybe another thing you can do, which is more kind of difficult, you can try to detect those patterns. Like if you try to build a list of those executables vulnerable to DLL side loading, and if you see some executable loading a DLL, an unsigned DLL from an unknown folder, then you can spot this technique by doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have here in the front.
Apart from the obvious false flags in Korean and the malware attribution from Trend Micro, what other clues did you find that directed you to APT31?
Well, this was a threat intelligence report made by other companies, and how they did it is that they also referred to previous reports.
And another question, how long did they stay in the net? Did they persist on the network? And what was their goal? Was it cyber espionage, credential stealing?
Yeah, this whole campaign that we investigated, it took several months, and their goal was, yes, cyber espionage, which is the case for almost all APTs.
We have one more here in the back.
Okay, so here. Have you seen other OSs affected by these techniques, or some techniques that resemble this but used to, like, I don't know, maybe Linux or Mac? Does this APT have some influence in that region?
Well, I think they do in fact Macs and Linux, but not with this malware. We haven't seen versions of the malware I talked about today for Mac and Linux.
Thank you. Any other questions? There. You still have the box in your hand, Georgy.
Ah?
Ah.
Yeah, the box is the prize.
Hello. So
Yeah.
you said the ultimate goal of this infection was to spy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so in this case, why would the Chinese IPT try to spy on Russian companies? Like, considering the geopolitical aspect, they are really friendly nations, right? So.
Well, you know, there are many examples about, well, APTs that allegedly, we don't attribute APTs to countries, but that are referred to be from friendly countries infecting each other. So, if the countries have friendly relationship with each other, it doesn't mean they can't infect each other with malware. That frequently happens.
Thank you. I see one more.
One more.
One more. They're in the back.
Did the did they target a specific sector with their payload, or did they choose a specific target, or was it a broad attack?
Yeah, they choose specific targets for their attack because it's cyber espionage, and they want specific targets. They send phishing emails specifically to them, and that's how they infect them.
Really, the last one. Or as you wish.
Yeah, thank you. Has any of your work been used to identify the perpetrators and bring them to justice? Somewhere in March, some individuals were arrested in connection with APT31. and I'm thinking maybe some of the work was used to identify them.
Well, our report dates to the summer, to July and August, so the arrest happened earlier. And it's actually very difficult to use certain intelligence to arrest those APTs in real life because it's a difficult thing to find them, and it's up to law enforcement to do it, to track all those attacks to real people.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the award goes to the question about GitHub. Congratulations.
The question about? Can you spot? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Congrats.